I want to talk about um, a rather very, very sobering verse out of our recent devotional passage from also from First Samuel chapter 2 about parenting. It's really important to do of parenting. So let's go there. First Samuel chapter 2. So this is the verse I would like us to just consider, especially if you're a mother or a father. And here's the verse. Um, Eli is the main priest that leads that leads God's synagogue. I mean, I guess it's the tabernacle at this point that leads to the tabernacle because the temple of God has not yet been built in Israel's history at this point. And so far, Eli seems like a fairly decently good man. He's very kind to Hannah early in the book, and it's his encouragement and prayer for her that leads to this tremendous blessing where she finally, instead of she's wrestling with infertility, she finally has this baby, and a tremendously important baby he is. He grows up to be, the great prophet Samuel. But there's this commentary about Eli that's kept in the Bible, and I want us to focus on. Here's what it says, verse 12. Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. That's the way I put it. Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. They did not know the Lord. I'll just stop there for just that one verse. Now, you know, if you read this is a little bit confusing part about how the sons of Eli, they served, the tabernacle, and they had authority under Eli, to take in people's sacrifices. But what the story begins to tell you is that they would abuse and corrupt and steal. They would not follow the ways of God's ways of how people were supposed to do sacrifice. In fact, they would steal money from the people. They would abuse the people, and they would use their authority to benefit themselves. And because of this, God is really angry at them, and he curses them. And then later on, they die, and then this curse comes upon Eli too, and then Eli dies too. Now, I'll just share a word with you about this. This is that's obviously a rather scary kind of story, but I want to ask you, do you think about that, especially if you're a mother and father for your own children? Simple verse. The children, his sons were worthless men. I mean, that's not, it's not like your friend's opinion. It's not your parents' opinion. It's not some school grade. This is God's inerrant word saying that these guys were worthless men. And just imagine that, if you're Eli and God would say to you, your sons are worthless men. And I want to just think about that. What does God think about you and your parenting? And what does God think about the kinds of people that your children are growing up to be? I don't know if your children are older now or all grown up or whether they're young. Especially if they're young, I really want to ask you to think about this question. What are the important goals that you have? What are the important desires that you have? You could say to your children, I really want you to know Jesus and I really want you to follow after Jesus, but your kids, your kids are not dumb. I mean, I'm a parent, and your kids know you. They know your desires. They know them very, very well. They can see your desires and your values and your priorities, and they don't just listen to what you say. They see how you live your life and what you care about, and they know what you really, really care about and what you really want for them. And it comes off in so many different ways in terms of how you treat them, with the priorities about the way you run your life, and they pick up your priorities too. Now, in our city, very often, especially in Asian circles, we want success for our kids, and we want our kids to go to the best schools, and we want our kids to have quote unquote everything, and we want them to get the best piano lessons. We want them to excel in sports, and we want to get them, like coding classes, or to be really, really good at really, really good at, whatever talent it is that you care about, dance or something else, all these kinds of things, because, we want to quote unquote give our kids everything. But one of the things I want to ask you to think about is, how badly do you want them to know the Lord? I'm sure that among all the good things you want your kids to have, knowing the Lord is one of them, but is it just one thing among many things? Or is it the most important thing? their character, their convictions, their deepest priorities and pursuits? Will it be Jesus? Will Jesus really be their life and their deepest, convictions? And I want to ask you, not in a kind of legalistic or a pushy or religiously kind of way, but in a very attractive and a grace-filled way. How can that be conveyed to your children? And so I want to ask you to think about that question, and just a couple things that I want to just give you a couple of tips. If you do not regularly pray for your children, if you're not on your knees asking for their faith, asking for a deep, that they wouldn't just become Christians, but they would truly love Jesus and cherish him with all their hearts, I would dare say you should ask that your children have such a faith that their love for Jesus and their willingness to sacrifice of things of worldly, what you think are important worldly advantages, would their love for him was so great that they will seek him first above the world, and it'll even challenge you. Are you willing to pray that kind of prayer? And then will you think about your life, and then the way you shape your time and your energy and put worship first? We really, that you will show your children it doesn't matter what we do. It isn't church or going to church like a legalism, but in our life, we are such poor and weak people. We go to worship. It doesn't matter if we're on a vacation. It doesn't matter if it's inconvenient. It doesn't matter if this is something for you that you got to like, no, I don't want you to miss church. Our family worships. We tremendously, deeply, desperately need Jesus. And it's not out of a legalism. It's not just because we're a good Christian. It's not a performance. It's because we, apart from Jesus, we are nothing, and we're gonna die, and we're so tremendously in need of him, and we're so thankful that he loves us, though we don't deserve it, by grace. And so, could you show that to your children, that deep sense of softness before God? And so those are two things I want to say. And one last thing, if you're willing, and one more thing, would you show your children your great reverence for Christ and his lordship, for Yahweh, by apologizing to your children, by repenting before your children? That if you've made worldly decisions, or you've emphasized this and you put pressure upon them and you've judged them in very worldly ways, and they've been, and you think you've heard, if you feel that, even as I'm talking now, if you feel conviction about that, you feel pricked in your heart and that convicted of that sin, would you confess that to your children and ask for forgiveness, especially if they're older, especially if they're teenagers, and maybe especially if they are adults now? Would you ask for forgiveness? Would you show that reverencing of Christ above all? And and so for you and for me and for all of us in our church, I don't want you to end up like Eli, and we don't want our children to be deemed by God as worthless men and women. Instead, you want the Lord to say, "Oh, these I cherish them. I look how they have lived. Look how much they love me and how much they walk with me." Don't you want that for your children? How much joy they have in the Lord and for the Lord. And so pray for that, seek that. And if you do seek that, ask his grace will overflow upon you. That's such a tremendous thing to ask, and it's tremendously pleasing before God. And I hope that you will consider these words.